Max was a ghost of a dog, a golden retriever whose fur was matted and thin, whose bones jutted out like the ridges of a barren mountain. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were cloudy with age and cataracts. The shelter had given him a week. "He's in renal failure," the vet had said softly. "The kindest thing would be to let him go." But a man named Tom, who had recently lost his own 15-year-old companion, couldn't bear the thought of Max dying alone in a cold, sterile cage. So he adopted him. "I'll just give him a warm bed and a full belly for his last days," Tom told his wife, Sarah. "He deserves to know he was loved at the end." They brought Max home, and he was as quiet and faded as they expected. He didn't play. He barely ate. He mostly just slept on a soft bed Tom had placed in the corner of the living room, his breathing shallow and labored. Tom, Sarah, and their 2 young children would sit with him, stroking his frail body and speaking to him in gentle whispers. It was a somber, heartbreaking vigil. They were simply providing hospice care for a dog the world had given up on. They knew his time was measured in days, perhaps even hours. On the 3rd night, the house was silent. Everyone was asleep. Tom had checked on Max before going to bed, placing a bowl of water near his head and whispering a gentle, "Good night, old boy." The dog hadn't even stirred. His life was fading, a candle flame flickering in the wind. But in the dead of night, something changed. Max, the dog who could barely stand, was on his feet. He was shaking, his legs trembling with a weakness that should have made movement impossible. He stumbled from his bed and dragged himself across the living room, his claws scratching faintly against the hardwood floor. He made his way to the bottom of the stairs, a journey that must have felt like miles to his failing body. He let out a weak, breathy bark. It was more of a cough, a pathetic puff of air. No one stirred. A primal, ancient instinct took over. Max knew he didn't have the strength to bark louder. He needed to get to Tom. With a surge of adrenaline born from sheer desperation, he began to climb the stairs. Each step was an agony. He hauled his useless back legs, whimpering with the effort, his body screaming in protest. It was a Herculean task, an impossible ascent for a dying dog. But he kept going, step by painful step, fueled by a purpose that burned brighter than his own life force. He finally reached the top and collapsed outside Tom and Sarah's bedroom door. He had no strength left to stand or bark. So he did the only thing he could. He began to slam his head and body against the door, over and over. Thump, thump, thump. A weak, rhythmic, desperate beat. Tom awoke with a start. "What is that noise?" he mumbled to Sarah. He got out of bed, annoyed and groggy, expecting to find one of the kids sleepwalking. He opened the door and looked down. His heart stopped. It was Max, collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. But it wasn't the dog that filled him with terror. It was the smell, a thick, acrid smell, smoke. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm began to shriek from downstairs, the smoke detector. But Max had been their first warning. Tom's head snapped towards the hallway, and he saw it, a thick black cloud of smoke billowing up the stairs. A faulty wire in the kitchen had sparked a fire, and the downstairs was rapidly filling with deadly smoke. Panic and adrenaline surged through him. He scooped up Max, who felt terrifyingly light in his arms, and screamed for Sarah to get the kids. They scrambled out of the house, hearts pounding, lungs burning, just as the first flames began to lick up the staircase. They stood on the lawn, watching the flashing lights of the fire trucks arrive, a family safe and alive, all because of the dog who was supposed to die. Max lay on the grass, cradled in Tom's arms, his breathing now dangerously slow. The effort had taken everything he had left. The vet had been right. His body had given out, but it hadn't given out in a quiet sleep. It had given out in an act of breathtaking heroism. He had used his final ounces of strength, his last few precious heartbeats, not for himself, but to save the family who had shown him kindness. He opened his eyes one last time, looked at Tom, and let out a soft, final sigh. Sometimes, a life that seems to have reached its end is just waiting for one last glorious purpose.